They called it the swinging 60s, the decade of optimism, idealism, and the feeling that everything was possible. The young were rejecting the values of an earlier generation and developing a culture and lifestyle unique to themselves. Pathe News chronicled the highlights of the decade in the newsreel cinemas, following the trends as they developed with bewildering speed. The Beatles dominated these years. Their music and that of those who followed them summed up the spirit of the age, as did, in fashion at least, a street in West London whose name lives on.
Carnaby Street never imagined years ago it would be a fashion centre, and it's worlds away from the Dorchester. It's the street where all the withered boys go for the expensive outfits the chicks dig. No use having a good leg if the trousers aren't cut to show it. No matter how handsome a mod may be, the right gear gives him real class. No wonder Carnaby Street's doing big business. They daren't fall behind in the fashion race. In case of doubt, they can always get advice from the chicks. So it was a Rolls Royce and Carnaby Street for the one and only Liberace. For someone who dresses as sharply as Lee, the gear grottos of London's Garbsville were irresistible. He was on a shopping spree. With his money, he might have been buying the shop. But no, he was in a thrifty mood. Just a few ties and some odds and ends to add to his way-out wardrobe. A quick riffle through the brocade jackets. Time was pressing for the man who made a grand piano and a candelabra his personal trademark. What better than a cape to add that debonair touch to the man who, more than a decade ago, brought his own special brand of romance into the lives of millions of women. When Mary Quant invades new realms of fashion, bright young girls are interested, and so is the national press. As the outcome of 2 years' hard work, Mary has perfected the very thing the new generation had been hoping for. Boots and shoes that are distinctive, comfortable, washable, and nearly indestructible. Mary believes that footwear should fit like a glove. Wear the latest kind when you're young, and in later life, you'll never complain that your feet are killing you. That sounds like a wonderful future, viewed from any angle. She's gorgeous. Obviously, he doesn't know an Avenger when he sees one. The cool beauty with the expert Irish whip is Diana Rigg, alias Emma Peel, Steed's new partner in the fight against the international underworld. She's dressed to kill in a fighting suit of black salon stretch jersey. This and the other way-out gear for mod maidens is the Jean Varyn collection, inspired by the TV thriller series. Steed has no complaints. To be a successful agent, you've got to have feminine appeal and feline speed. The negligee and catsuit are just right. Some target. No home is ideal if your figure's got completely out of control. The Lissom Rest takes off the unwanted inches without dieting or going to a masseuse. The Radiant Heat fold-away cooker makes no smoke, smell or splattering. It's portable, so can be used in any room or at a friend's house if you don't like their cooking. Imagine that you had your wish, a beautiful house just where you would like it to be. Well, here it is, the house in the sun in a Caribbean setting. You could run a bath and watch TV without getting out of bed. Sir Malcolm Sargent's ideas inspired the living room. Valerie Hobson designed the kitchen. It's a glorious dream, coming out of the London cold, and there you are, in the Caribbean. Well, of course, it may happen. Longbridge, a big day for the little one. This is the 2 millionth Mini in company with some of those who helped make the pint-sized people car into an international achievement. As it came off the production line, British Leyland's general manager George Turnbull and newly knighted Sir Alec Isigonis, designer of the Mini, drove it into motoring history as the first British car ever to have passed the incredible production figure. 10 years after the first Mini made its debut, it has virtually become the backbone of production at Longbridge, with a bright future still ahead. Sir Alex Creation was born with a golden spoon in its bonnet. Mini number 2 million proves it. So the shiny new addition to the family of Minis, complete with the tough guy slogan, joined the lucrative stream of compact autos which begin their career at the factory near Birmingham. It's a career with an assured success, for the Mini is one of the biggest success stories the motor trade has ever known. Certainly the high spot of British motoring history. It's been said they plan to go on making Minis for another 10 years. There'll always be customers for the car with the reputation of a giant and the dimensions of a dwarf that's big enough for the whole world. What a day it was at Adelaide Airport. Arriving to meet the citizens were John Lennon, 2 other Beatle regulars, and Jimmy Nicol. Paul McCartney was on the beat as usual. Jimmy, of course, was deputising for Ringo Starr, who had been too ill to travel at the same time, but was coming along later.
I see it. I missed the ashtray.
Paul, what do you expect to find here in Australia?
Australians.
You're going to be surprised. Do you have any acknowledged leader of the group?
No, not really.
Have you been practicing up your Australian accents?
No, Colin, not at all. We can't get it, you know.
If there are only 3 things you could do in Australia, what would they be?
Well, I don't know, really.
Let's go home.
Well, I've been talking all the time. First of all, I think I'd like to tie me kangaroo down sport. Then, well, son of riders. Yeah.
Are you individually millionaires yet?
No, that's another lousy room. I wish we were.
Brian Epstein a millionaire?
No, even he's not one, poor fellow.
Where does all the money go?
Well, a lot of it goes to Her Majesty. She's a millionaire.
5 o'clock in the morning at chilly London Airport is nothing to a Beatle worshipper. In fact, some of them have been here all night to welcome the idols home from their 3rd American tour. The fans have their hair to keep them warm, at least. Says Paul, fancy getting up this time in the morning just to see us. They need the MBE more than we do. Paul again about the American tour. It was pretty rough. We've had so much success we don't care if it fades tomorrow. We've reached the point where we don't have worries anymore. That's the point most people want to reach. Not this lot. The point they want to reach is a Beatle, and if they did, the Beatles would have worries. With the fabulous 4 is Brian Epstein, the man whose worries most people would think well worth it at the price. Is it true they made $1 million on this tour, somebody asks? But the Beatles just smile and drive off, unworried. Riding at anchor or carriage and safely outside the 3-mile limit, the innocent-looking ex-ferryboat Caroline is causing quite a stir in official circles. She's a floating broadcasting station, hoping to make a big thing out of commercial radio and waiting for the advertisements to roll in. I'm no pirate, insists Captain Mackay, even if the radio crew are. No danger to his ship so far. Generators supply power for the wireless transmitter. Caroline Radio is on the air 12 hours a day, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Between those hours, they think, there's a public large enough to attract local advertising revenue. Crew technicians have comfortable off-duty quarters, and to all indications, Caroline is a happy ship. The radio company believe it's all perfectly legal. In the ship's studio, they broadcast with no more concern than if it were all in Broadcasting House.
This is Radio Caroline on 199, England's first commercial radio station. My name's Simon D, with you for the next 2 hours.
The 20-year-old Queen of Pop sure had her audience in the palm of her hand. As some of the tearful ladies in the crowd said, she made a lovely bride. After crying all the way to the altar, Lulu emerged as Mrs. Lulu Gibbs. Hubby Morris was a lucky guy. He'd got the girl thousands of fellows would give their right arm for. This was wedding day number 2 for Cilla Black and Bobby Willis. Cilla and Bobby, her personal manager, were spliced for the first time at a London Register office in January. But to satisfy herself and her family, Cilla got special dispensation for the church ceremony at St. Mary's Roman Catholic Church at Woolton. No stars, no celebrities, just the family, a few friends, and a grand lot of well-wishers to send the Liverpool lass and her husband on the road to a happy marriage.
The sounds of the 60s, which preoccupied so many of the young, were a world away from the politics of the day. In America, the Kennedy era had its tragically brief flowering, cut short by an assassin's bullet. In Britain, 13 years of Conservative rule was brought to an end by the Labour Party, who governed for most of the decade, with problem after problem piling upon the Prime Minister Harold Wilson.
Downing Street is on the screens of the whole world. Under new management is the most famous political house in Europe. Mr. Wilson entertained to lunch Mrs. Bandaranaike, Prime Minister of Ceylon. There was a crowd to see the new ministers. Here is Mr. George Brown with his wife, arriving for Mr. Wilson's first cabinet meeting. Minister of Labour, Ray Gunter. He says his job is a bed of nails. Richard Crossman, Minister of Housing and Local Government. Dennis Healey, Defence Secretary. Colonial Secretary Anthony Greenwood, popular with all sections of the party. Surprise appointment is Frank Cousins as Minister of Technology. Over the City of London spread gloom and apprehension. There was another attack on the pound. In the stock exchange, the sensitive barometer of Britain's financial position, pessimists feared the worst, even optimists saw no silver lining on the black clouds. At the British Industrial Exhibition in Moscow, the bad news did not seem to have reached Mr. Wilson. The export drive to Russia had gone unexpectedly well. British machinery, as the Premier and Mr. Kosygin saw, was in strong demand. To our officials, the plight of sterling was far removed. No one seemed to have heard of the London complainings that the Premier was in the wrong place at the wrong time. When the two Prime Ministers began discussions at the Kremlin, the atmosphere was different. It was evident to Mr. Wilson that Russia would not join Geneva peace talks over Vietnam, nor intervene over Hanoi's threats to US airman prisoners. The Soviet ministers, hour after hour, declined to budge an inch. There was nothing for Mr. Wilson to do but return home. The immediate danger was in London. The Bank of England had again drawn heavily on gold reserves to save the pound. Even as the Premier was flying back, there was continued heavy selling of sterling. Nobody knows better than Mr. Wilson that in a world of international finance, there is no sentiment. Nations whose currency is ailing must expect from the foreign dealers a kick in the money bags. For the Premier, full speed to Downing Street for the most crucial cabinet since he came to power. For staring them in the face was perhaps the most desperate financial crisis of our time. There could be no more half measures, no more evasions. The business of a government is to govern resolutely, honestly putting the country first.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
The outstanding personality of the year, John Kennedy, is elected to America's greatest political office. Youngest ever president, first Roman Catholic to go to the White House. What an amazing triumph. Against Nixon, who this time last year would have given him a dog's chance. Richard Nixon has been vice president for 2 terms. The Republican Party was unanimously behind him. Yet this man, with a strong running mate in Cabot Lodge, has been beaten. Not even the last-minute personal help and appeal of President Eisenhower could turn the scale. New Yorker claimed them, but when the cheers died down, voted for Kennedy. Perhaps they didn't like Nixon, and perhaps though they did like Ike, they weren't very impressed by his presidential record. The free world wishes well to John Kennedy, President of the United States.
This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. To halt this offensive buildup, a strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated. All ships of any kind bound for Cuba, from whatever nation or port, will, if found to contain cargoes of offensive weapons, be turned back.
Jackie went with him on his last political journey. In Dallas, he was welcomed to Texas by State Governor Connolly. There, too, was the Vice President, Mr. Lyndon Johnson, who is a Texan. In that state, the Democratic government is not popular, but the Kennedy charm seemed to be effective as ever, as the motorcade was cheered on its way. From a high window rings out the shot that changes American history. Confusion is indescribable. Both the President and Governor Connolly are hit. While they are rushed to hospital, swarms of police and FBI men search for the assassin. At the hospital, there is a desperate but hopeless fight to save the President's life. But that life ebbs out. The doctors afterward say there never was a chance. The flowers Mrs. Kennedy carried lie blood-stained in the car. Thousands in Dallas are weeping at the tragedy. The police now have the murder gun. On it, they say, a palm print of the man under arrest. He is 24-year-old Lee Harvey Oswald. 4 years ago, he defected to Russia, worked there, and married a Russian. Now the world hears the appalling news. President Kennedy is dead. In a bronze coffin, his body arrives at the airport. Mrs. Kennedy, her dress stained with her husband's blood, rides in the ambulance. Automatically, Mr. Lyndon Johnson becomes president.
This is a sad time for all people. We have suffered a loss that cannot be weighed. For me, it is a deep personal tragedy. I know that the world shares the sorrow that Mrs. Kennedy and her family bear. I will do my best. That is all I can do. I ask for your help and God's.
It is dark at the White House when the body of Mr. Kennedy is brought back. The saddest homecoming in presidential history. One of the most favored men is on earth no more. By thousands, the last tribute was now paid. But Jacqueline Kennedy was to return at midnight when there was no one there, to commune in silence at the last resting place of her beloved husband. Dr. King preached nonviolence. The demonstrations he led, like this one in Washington, were examples of orderly but powerful pleas for the equality and integration of American Negroes. But Dr. King was shot down by an assassin in Memphis, butchered by someone who did not understand the meaning of peace, as did the great Negro leader. In Washington, at one of the greatest of all rallies for equality and freedom, Dr. King made an impassioned plea on behalf of the thousands of Negroes and white sympathizers gathered at the Lincoln Memorial.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream.
Dr. Martin Luther King was not allowed to see his dream become reality. For 2 days, negotiations aboard HMS Tiger held the interest of the whole world. The Prime Minister's colleagues included the Attorney General, Sir Elwyn Jones, and recently back from Rhodesia, the Commonwealth Secretary, Mr. Herbert Bowden. Also on board was Sir Humphrey Gibbs, the Governor of Rhodesia. Ian Smith had accepted the final chance to negotiate a settlement. While they were all on HMS Tiger, there was still a restrained but justified optimism that Rhodesia would agree to the Prime Minister's 6 principles. Back in London, at Lancaster House, Mr. Wilson met the delegates of the EFTA countries. Ian Smith had not replied, though an answer was required by 10 o'clock that morning. While talks went on about Britain's approach to the common market, undoubtedly Rhodesia was uppermost in the minds of many present. Behind Ian Smith's request for a few hours' grace, did it mean he was pleading with colleagues to accept the British conditions, or was it a stiffening of resistance? Finally, the answer, no. That night, Parliament had its most dramatic session for 10 years. London. It started as an anti-Vietnam War demonstration in Trafalgar Square. About 10,000 gathered. Most of them were young. Most of them were sincere. They wanted peace. Their motives seemed honorable. They came from most walks of life. Vanessa Redgrave, as usual, was in the vanguard of the would-be peacemakers. But also there were troublemakers. People not content to just voice their disapproval of the war in Vietnam. A hardcore with intentions to drag the majority of well-intentioned demonstrators down to their sickening level. And so they marched through the Sunday streets of London to Grosvenor Square and the American Embassy. Riot was being incited. At Grosvenor Square, police warned to expect trouble waited. Their intention to keep the peace, prevent trouble. But at the head and in the midst of the advancing column, the hate makers were at work. This was how they turned a demonstration for peace into a bloody riot such as Britain has never before witnessed.
A 117 policemen were injured while defending themselves and doing their duty. Only 45 demonstrators were hurt. The police have earned the highest possible praise for their incredible self-control against overwhelming brute force on a day when a demonstration for peace ended as a war in the heart of London.
The leader of a mighty nation had made a solid impact on Britain. Now he was to meet the monarch of the country which, he'd affirmed, had such a close friendship with his own. Her Majesty and the Duke were entertaining the man who can, and doubtless will, do so much to shape the future for a peaceful world.
elegant surroundings of the Queen's home, there was a man who had come to this country a stranger, but who, within 48 hours, knew so well that he was amongst friends.
When President Nixon took over, he inherited a program of space technology designed to put an American on the moon before the decade was out. If this was an age when everything seemed possible in lifestyle, so it was in science and engineering. Feats that lay in the realm of science fiction suddenly became a reality. A giant leap for mankind was how Neil Armstrong put it when he set foot on the surface of the moon, a path that began, ironically, in the Soviet Union. The exploits of Yuri Gagarin at the start of the decade were the spur for the race to the moon that followed.
All Russia's just wild about Yuri Gagarin, first man to conquer space. Modest, just a family man. It was no secret, either in Moscow or anywhere else, that Russia was ready to make the attempt. At 7 a.m. our time, the 450-ton rocket went up. Russian diagrams to show how a previous space rocket functioned. It sheds stage 1, then stage 2, leaving the spaceship to go into orbit at 18,000 miles an hour. Gagarin was in radio contact with the ground. In his 4.5-ton nose cone, he orbited once and was back again 108 minutes after takeoff. Major Gagarin was landing in Moscow, and Mr. K was with Yuri's wife and parents to greet him. What a hero was this young cosmonaut, unknown one day, the next, the most publicized man in the world. In the big heart of the emotional Russian people, the man from space held the place of honor. A bear hug from Khrushchev expressed the feelings of all the nation. Then came the family greetings, his father and mother included. What a moment for Valentina. Her husband was back after the strangest adventure in the history of mankind. No less proud of Yuri, and indeed quite overcome, was his father. In a triumphal cavalcade, Gagarin was driven into Moscow, sitting between his wife and Khrushchev. What the whole of Russia felt, the people of Moscow put into their cheers for hero number 1 of the Soviet Union, Yuri Gagarin. At Cape Canaveral, they were not launching just one more rocket. The 90-foot Thor Delta carried Telstar, the satellite destined to bounce TV pictures from America to Britain and France. They were all set at Gonelli. At the controls, the post office engineers directed the aerial in line with a signal from Telstar, more than 2,000 miles out over the Atlantic. From Gonelli, the picture would be landlined to London and broadcast on BBC and ITV networks. The first picture received was a poor one, but faults at the Cornwall end were quickly righted, and then the face of Frederick R. Capel was clearly seen. He is chairman of the American Telephone Company. Captain Booth and his team were happy men. A few more Telstars in orbit, and we could have all round the clock world TV.
Something new came out of the William Denny shipyard at Dunbarton. A 60-foot hovercraft built for experiment to get to know how far the air cushion idea can be applied. Those sidewalls or skirts prevent the air cushion on which the hovercraft rides from dispersing. There seems no reason why this type of ship shouldn't be used for channel crossing and even longer trips. Separate engines make the cushion of air, and 2 outboard motors drive propellers for fore and aft propulsion. On the Garralock, trial runs went by without a hitch. The hovercraft principle has reached another stage in its important development.
New models like the Cortina from the Ford stable will catch the eye of hundreds of buyers visiting the show from across the channel. The British Motor Corporation ranges over the entire field of motoring, meeting almost every need and every purse. The Hillman Super Minx is an eyeful, standing up to the competition of the three lovelies trying it out for comfort. Lord Montague must have found the E-Type quite a contrast to those vintage cars he collects at Bewley. This car industry is one of Britain's big dollar earners. Perhaps in the next few years, it will expand and put us really on the map of Europe. Certainly, this model has been an outstanding success since it erupted on the sports car world less than 2 years ago. Manufacturers are now concentrating their gaze on the lands across the channel, where in all probability, great new markets, the common market, await those who can deliver the right goods at the right price. If this year's motor show is any guide, the British car industry will rise to the opportunity.
Winched out of the capsule Gemini 4, the astronauts who fired the imagination of mankind. This was the epilogue of a truly epic adventure. The 4 days in space, the actual walk in space. 425 miles away from their starting point, Ed White and Jim McDivitt were safe. Of the walk, Major White was the hero.
Gemini 4, Houston, Capcom.
Pathe News cannot pay too high a tribute to the courage of the astronauts White and McDivitt. To 200 miles below Gemini 4, the coast of California, as seen by the astronauts, in all the vivid colors that meet the eye of the 1965 space explorers outside the Earth's atmosphere. Over the Pacific, east of Hawaii, Major White emerged from the capsule with his complicated equipment. Out of this world, things seemed to be merely floating. Actually, it was all hurtling in orbit at more than 17,000 miles an hour. Watch now as a thermal glove emerges from the capsule to become a 5-finger missile, joining the rest up here. And just look at this view of the Earth below.
I can't do that, young man. He's on fire. Roger. Gemini 4, Houston.
Say the moon. Why choose this as our goal? Why climb the highest mountain? Why 35 years ago fly the Atlantic? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. I'm at the foot of the ladder. I'm going to step off the land now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
As Neil Armstrong and his colleagues played games on the surface of the moon, more down-to-earth sporting history was being made, tragically as it turned out for two sporting heroes. Donald Campbell died in an attempt on the world water speed record, and world motor racing driver Jim Clark was also killed competing on the continent. On a happier note, England won the World Cup at Wembley, and for the first time, Pathe News covered the high point of the racing season, the Epsom Derby, in colour.
Newsreel history was made on Epsom Downs, the Derby filmed for the first time by Pathe News in Technicolor. Everybody, real live dukes, lords galore, plus royalty, Pearly King variety. There's no extreme the Derby doesn't justify. It should have been easy, without having stable connections or being psychic, to find the winner in so small a field. But advice from a professional prophet is always worth it at Epsom.
I've got a horse! I've got an ass to beat the favourite! £100 a weight, die hard! I'll lay £100 a weight, die hard, I'll lay.
Rich man, poor man, beggar man, income tax collector. The Derby's for everybody. Sharing the interest of all her people, the Queen was at Epsom. Lord Rosebery escorted her to the paddock. What a colourful scene it all made. Here was the chance to see the runners at close quarters. Despite Angers, other horses were highly favoured. Toliatus, for example. Britain's main hope against the French and Irish invasion, St. Paddy, owned by Sir Victor Sassoon, looked well. There was a thrill as into the paddock came the little men on whom so much depended. Even their superb skill, the Derby course severely tests. Lester Piggott had St. Paddy under good control. Angers seemed nervous, but the tragic drama awaiting him was such as not even master film director Alfred Hitchcock could have imagined. Nor did anyone in the near-record crowd know how terrible a fate lay so soon in store for the favourite. Below, the field of 17 gave no trouble at the tapes. This was the moment for which the whole racing world was waiting. The greatest classic of the flat season was about to start. Mr. Alec Marsh appraised the behaviour of the field. All 17 were under starter's orders, and without difficulty he got them away first time. 1.5 miles to go, the most exacting test of speed, stamina and rider's skill in racing. As they pounded down the slope towards Tattenham Corner, the French colt Angers, hot favourite at 2-1, broke a fetlock, though few people were aware of it at the time. 2 furlongs out, Kithnos had a good chance, but Lester Piggott, brilliantly timing his effort and placed third from the rails, took St. Paddy to the front, held off the challenge of Alcius, and began to look like the winner if he could keep up his speed. And maintain it he did. Kithnos was fading. Alcius had no more in reserve. By 3 lengths, St. Paddy won the Derby. Alcius second, Kithnos third.
Christine Truman, Angela Mortimer made this a truly historic Wimbledon. 47 years had passed since 2 English girls met in the final, and not since 1937 had the title been won by a British woman. A tonic indeed for the home country. There seemed to be a chance that rain might fall before the day was over. Otherwise, what a wonderful day. Christine serving, showing the power that puts her among the best in the world when she's on top form. Point to Christine. Championship point now to Angela Mortimer. She'd won the 11th game and was 40-15 in the 12th. Christine failed to get the ball over, and that was it. What a terrific battle these girls had fought. Princess Alice, Countess of Athlone, came onto the court to present the trophy to the girl from Devon, Angela Mortimer. There couldn't have been a happier girl anywhere in Britain, nor, surely, a more gallant loser. The whole tennis world says, bravo, Angela.
There could be no finer setting for the final chapter in the great adventure story of a man and his boat. Thousands had come to see this historic occasion. to greet with a hero's welcome the man who was to be honoured by his queen in public. And so, with his family, Sir Francis Chichester came ashore from the gallant 53-foot ketch, which had brought him alone but safely, full circle around the world to home. The pink ribbon of the order rested on Sir Francis' shoulders. How right it was that he should be within sight of his beloved boat, a boat which had brought him 29,000 miles to the greatest honor of all. And there she was, travel-stained, but worthy of a royal visit. Queen Elizabeth II was honoring Gypsy Moth, her proud captain escorting the Queen to inspect her, just as did Sir Francis Drake to the Golden Hind with another Elizabeth.
It was soon after dawn that Bluebird was got ready for the record attempt. There was little wind, the water was smooth. The evening before, Donald Campbell drew the ace and queen of spades, the deadly shadow of remorseless fate. He was a superstitious man. Dedicated, his mission in life coming before everything. The Orpheus jet was easily capable of driving Bluebird at 300 miles an hour. British, the record had to remain. He had driven his sports car for the last time. Though on that perfect first run, there was no hint of tragedy. They timed him at 297 miles an hour. With luck, the new record would be his. But luck had run out. Fate was to strike. He had sacrificed his life for speed, as centuries ago men dared the oceans and found new worlds, scaled mountains into lands beyond, and sailed out of Plymouth to circumnavigate the globe. None could imagine at that moment the depth of grief of Leo Villa, who served the Campbells, father and son, nearly 45 years. All he saw here was the debris left upon the lake. 5,000 years ago, they said, "Let us now praise famous men." And in Lake Coniston now laid the body of a famous man who was among the bravest of the brave. With teammate Graham Hill, Clark was to compete in a Formula 2 race at Hockenheim, Germany. Fate decreed it would be his last race. The 32-year-old sheep farmer from the border country prepared to race his Lotus Ford Cosworth. The track was wet, but not unduly so, as the master driver set off on the first circuit. It was in the 5th lap that something went wrong. Clark's car had not reappeared in front of the timekeeper. The reason was soon clear. Clark had careered off the track at over 150 miles an hour. A stunned Graham Hill searched among the wreckage for a clue to the inexplicable crash. Clark had been killed instantly as his car smashed through the trees bordering the track. Colin Chapman and the rest of the Lotus team, the world mourns the loss of a likeable man who was also one of the greatest Grand Prix drivers of all time. But as England kicked off, playing right to left and quickly built up an attack, excitement made the Wembley atmosphere electric. England had to score, and if the prayers of millions could inspire them, surely a goal was not far off. The West German defence was like a stone wall. Again, England launched an offensive, and again the German blockade could not be penetrated. It's there! Peters has scored! For the Wembley thousands and the millions at home, one thought: victory! Germany would not let up. Then, seconds before the final whistle, agony for England. Weber scored. It had to be extra time. The first period of extra time proved to the full the value of Ramsey's training methods. England began with a vigour and speed astounding after the grueling 90 minutes they'd already played. Charlton and his fellow sharpshooter. The referee consulted the linesman, who'd been in line with the posts, and goal it was. It was West Germany who were now noticeably the slower team. When only a minute to go, England still had no thought of being content with that one-goal lead. Racing to beat the whistle, Geoff Hurst saw an opening in the defence and achieved the hat-trick. Bobby Moore led England up to the royal box to receive the
Earlier in the decade, the Queen had an equally pleasant task to undertake. She invested her eldest son, Prince Charles, as Prince of Wales at a ceremony in Carnarvon Castle. Noel Coward was given a splendid party on his 70th birthday, and in yet another brilliant piece of pageantry,